Hey there, welcome to the Collide podcast. This is Willow Weston, and I'm so glad to hang out with you today. I just got to have an amazing conversation with Elizabeth Moser. She is a speaker, teacher, and co-host of the Intentional Parents podcast. So for all you mamas out there listening, you're going to want to listen to this. She hops on the pod today and just genuinely shares her story and how the Lord has been with her in the midst of facing some pretty large challenges in her family, and how He's meeting her in her grief, and how He is purposing her grief, not only in her children's lives, but in other people's lives. And I think you will be inspired. I don't know what you have going on in your life, but I know that we all as moms hit chapters that we didn't foresee being chapters in our story. We all have pain and brokenness and suffering. We have messy mom moments. And I have a feeling that this conversation will minister to those places that you have experienced as well. So take a listen. Elizabeth, it's so fun to have you on the Collide podcast today.
Oh, I'm so honored to be here.
There's so many things I want to ask you, but just to give listeners kind of some perspective, I want to jump right into, you're doing a lot of work around intentional parenting, and I want to talk about what that looks like. But how did you get into this work? What made you decide to start really honing in on this topic?
Man, it's quite a funny roundabout way that both my husband and I started getting involved doing stuff like this. It actually started with my parents, who had been in church ministry for decades and decades, and were just kind of asking the question of what are we supposed to do as we get older. And their roles had kind of changed at the church that they were at. And so they put together it started as just a conference for parents to be able to come to, primarily young parents, to learn about how to raise kids who passionately love Jesus. And they were both first-generation Christians and had just poured their heart and soul into the four of us kids. And we all grew up just loving Jesus, walking with Jesus. Many of us were actually in ministry. So they put this conference together, and my husband and I would go to it, especially as our kids were little. We would go to it like frequently because you learn something new every time. And they eventually wrote a book. And my husband and I, we had 4 kids, our family was growing, and we were actually planning to plant a church. And there's quite a long story around that of why we realized that was not something that our family was up for. We'd gone through some pretty intense health challenges with one of our kids, and then ended up having a special needs daughter. And so we were just looking at our whole life like, God, what in the world are you doing? We thought you were taking us one way, and that's a closed door. So what are we supposed to do now? And so my parents, they started chatting with us, and they're like, well, we don't want this ministry to end with us. Right now it ends with us when we die. This is not a legacy ministry. And they had been kind of planting seeds for a long time, kind of seeing if my husband would be interested. And he was like, no, I don't want to be the family guy. That's not what I want to do. But God just slowly worked in our hearts to just kind of try it out. Okay, maybe we'll stay in full-time ministry. We ended up moving and started to work at another church while also doing intentional part-time with my parents, not really knowing what it was supposed to become. At that time, it was still just a conference and a book. And in 2019, we started a podcast, and it's just been such a journey ever since then. Eventually, about 4 years in to us joining, my husband went full-time and is now he and I are leading it, and my parents are still involved and speaking into it. The podcast we mostly do together, keeping it multi-generational, which has just been such a gift. But it's been if you were to have asked either of us if this was ever something we saw ourselves doing. It would have been absolutely no. And
Right.
especially while our kids are still at home. We have 4 kids, 16, 13, almost 10, and almost 8. And
Wow.
so, right in the humbling middle of actually doing all of it. But it's just been so incredible to see so many families who most of them did not come from Christian homes, and they want something desperately different for their kids. Or maybe they came from a Christian home, but it was very rules-based and behavior-focused, and they really want to do it differently. They just have no idea how. And so to get to enter into their stories and just have conversations around, what does that look like? What does it look like when you fail? And what do we do when we get it right? We thank God for it and ask for more, But yeah, it's just been such an honor and a privilege to get to do.
Such a unique story. I mean, most people don't set out to say yes to a career alongside their parents. And I think it speaks to who your parents have been in your life, that you would want to do that. And I'm curious because I can so resonate with being, the first generation to walk with Jesus in kind of my line of relatives and generations before me. What do you think your parents did right that not only fanned the flame of faith in your life and your siblings' lives, but created this ministry that has such legacy that's now pouring into other families?
Yeah. I mean, the 2 things that always come to mind when I think about that are my parents were the same people at home as they were on stage on Sunday, or when we had people over for dinner, or anywhere else. That was so important. And really, my dad led the charge with that. Like integrity and being the same person all the time was so deeply embedded in who they were growing up and who they are now. And so I think, so often you hear story after story of kids who were raised in a ministry home wanting nothing to do with church, oftentimes wanting nothing to do with their parents. And so often when you peel back the layers, it's because their parents were kind of different at home than they were at church. And so I think that is one thing that just always sticks out. And then I'd say the second thing is, if there's one thing my parents got right and still get right, is we had we call it now, like my husband and I somehow stumbled upon the term, like this ecosystem of forgiveness in our house. Like they were never slow to ask our forgiveness when they'd blown it, or to make sure that when we fought as siblings or there was some rupture in our relationship, that they slowed everything down, stopped everything to work things through, not just to say, I'm sorry and move on, but actually work things through to reconciliation. And, growing up, I thought that was just normal. Like everybody does that. And then I got older and had a few bumps in friendships and got married and realized, oh, that's not how everybody moves through relationships. But I think it's what has made us be able to continue to do things like work together now, because it's not just unspoken, it's constantly respoken. You can bring anything to me. I want to know if there's something that you're feeling, if I want to know if I've offended you. And that's trickled down to the whole family and to my husband. I mean, my husband did not grow up in a home like that. And he joined my family. We met at 17 and dated for a little while, broke up for a couple years, then got back together. But really, he's been in our family since he was in high school. And now that's permeated down to him and how we lead our family. And I just think it sounds so simple, but it is that powerful when you create that culture where you're constantly repairing ruptures that have happened. You can't help but feel safe and known and able to come back,
I love, and you snuck this word in there, it isn't profound, but it really feels profound. You said it wasn't unspoken, it was respoken. And I think that can give us some encouragement or directive as parents to like re-speak values that we hold to be true in our families. I'm curious, you had these parents who loved Jesus and they wanted you to love Jesus. And so many of us, Christian parents, that's the case. And yet we can't make our kids love Jesus. We have to invite them into their own faith. I'm curious for you, was there a moment or an encounter or a collision with Jesus where your faith became your own?
Yeah. I was in high school and I was homeschooled until my freshman year of high school. I was super shy, really insecure, socially awkward. And I started going to public high school, and halfway through my freshman year, we moved about 3 or 4 hours from the Portland area to Southern Oregon, to this little tiny town called Medford. And I did not want to go. And we get there, and I know nobody. I started a new school. My sister was a junior at the time. And so we just bonded together. We previously had just fought all the time growing up, but we bonded together because we had nobody else. We only had each other. And I distinctly remember we were living in this tiny little apartment because we were not sure if we were going to build a house or buy a house. We weren't even really sure if we were going to stay. We were living in this tiny apartment, sharing a room, 3 of us in one tiny room. And I'm sitting on my bed and just start reading my Bible, and I just asked God, will you just give me friends? Like, I just need friends. And literally the next day at church, I meet this girl who's really connected at my high school who leads a girls' Bible study, and she invites me to it. And so I go to it, and I make these friends that I had the whole time I was going to that school. And it was just this moment of, for me, I think it took seeing that God was that personal for me. Like, I'd heard about that my whole life. But I think that was the first time I had really experienced as a little kid, just asking God, will you please just do this for me? And then he answered, which just built my faith to trust him more. And then to see what had unfolded, we only lived there a couple years, but it ended up, my faith just blossomed in that time. We went to a really simple church that just taught the word verse by verse, but it was like I actually cared. Instead of just, this is what my family does on a Sunday. And so I would say it started there. And then, I could tell you so many marked moments of when it went deeper and deeper and deeper. But I think we all have to, and our kids have to experience that moment where it moves from head, which head is not bad. It has to start there. For most, it starts there, especially for somebody wired like me who's more logical. It was definitely head knowledge first before it actually was like an embodied experience and something I experienced more emotionally. But it was like that first time of experiencing God in that way, I feel like set the stage for continuing to go to him myself, and not just as a family during our family Bible time or at church because we're supposed to,
Right. Yeah, that's very cool. You are a part of this intergenerational team with your parents, Phil and Diane Comer, and you are doing this really cool work with your husband as well. You're not doing this from a place of everything has been easy peasy as a parent and there's been solid, only joy and no challenges. Can you invite us a little bit into what your parenting challenges have been and how that has maybe shaped you for being able to allow God to use your story to speak into other people's challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the simplest way to put it is my motherhood journey has looked absolutely nothing like I thought it would. And it looks nothing now like it did in the beginning when it first started. We had kids really young. We were 23 when we had our first, and had our first 2 kids, took a little break, kind of a 4-year gap between our older 2 and the other 2. And we had our 3rd daughter, and she was about 6 months old, and she just started making kind of these odd movements. And I ended up actually taking her to urgent care, thinking she had an ear infection. She started kind of doing those movements there. And I'll never forget that doctor got all awkward and funny and said, "I'll be right back," and left the room. And probably clearer than I have ever heard God speak. I just those moments as a parent where you just know like something's wrong. And I knew like this is not good. And I just felt like the Holy Spirit, as if God was just like right in my ear, just say, "I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you." And I remember it so vividly. And that feeling of, I know this is not okay, but God is telling me he's with me. And we ended up getting rushed to the hospital, and she got diagnosed with a very rare form of epilepsy called infantile spasms. It's like 3% of all epilepsy. And they call it a catastrophic form of epilepsy because the brain is basically seizing 24 hours a day, not just the physical manifestation of the seizure, but the brain is in total chaos. So we're in the hospital getting this fire hose of information, and they tell us there's this spectrum that she's going to fall on, anywhere from she won't survive the treatment she needs because the treatment is very aggressive. You have to get them to stop. So if she survives the treatment, she'll be anywhere from never talk to you, never walk, G-tube fed her whole life in a wheelchair, all the way to best case scenario, she will have learning disabilities, behavioral problems, epilepsy her whole life, but high functioning, talking to you, able to do somewhat normal things. And they said, all we can tell you is you have to get her absolutely every bit of therapy on the planet for the next 5 years. The next 5 years are crucial. And we have no idea where she's going to fall. And it'll be at least 5 years before you have any idea. And for a total type A planner, information like that is just hard to know what to do with. And it just spiraled us into just a steep learning curve of not only just learning to be parents of a high medically, like she had high medical needs in the beginning, constantly at the doctor or the hospital, 5 days a week of therapy. I mean, it just was the primary thing that I did, combined with really having to face, it wasn't the first time I'd been like intimately exposed to suffering. I grew up with my mom going deaf. My little brother got type 1 diabetes at 8. Like our family had experienced suffering. So I knew that that was not foreign. And that actually at that time didn't really shake my faith. But what was very foreign to me was learning to grieve and learning to grieve honestly with God. And I think I had misheard or maybe heard mistaught, I don't know, so many sermons on James chapter 1, like count it all joy when you encounter various trials. And I just thought I'm just supposed to somehow be happy. Like I'm just supposed to be okay. And I was not okay for a very long time. And it ended up being just this beautiful, horribly gut-wrenching at the same time journey of learning that what it looks like to actually bring all of my grief, all of what I actually feel to God and let him meet me in that. And that was so transformative really for our whole family, but I think especially for me, who is more logically bent, emotion second. That was the gift that came with it, but it kind of is what started really the last decade of hard thing after hard thing after hard thing. And, you know, I feel like if we had been doing anything in the family and all of the last decade had not happened, I would have had really good intentions and been entirely unhelpful to people. Because I think the one shared experience that most of us have this side of heaven is some form of suffering. And some of us suffer greatly. Some of us suffer just differently. Some of us face our suffering. Some of us try to outrun it. But we live this side of the garden. And so we all experience suffering, whether it's in our family, whether it's outside of our family, whatever it is. And I think prior to the last decade, I had a lot of ideals of what my family was going to look like, what kind of woman I was going to be, what kind of mother I was going to be. And I think it's God's grace in many ways that a lot of that got dismantled. And I think it just gives us a unique perspective into what most families are dealing with in some way.
If you're longing to grow in Jesus, make sure you check out my new Bible study book, Collide, a 6-week journey toward healing. It comes with 6 teaching sessions, reflection questions, prayers, all the things you need to grow. And if you're longing for that, you can do this by yourself, but you could also grab some girls and grow, because there's powerful things that happen when we gather together. We're already hearing feedback on how this is impacting lives. So make sure you get your very own Collide study wherever you get books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever. Let's keep colliding. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to me. You bring up this sort of idea you had that you're supposed to count it all as joy. Like you had a verse that you kind of like took as like, this is what I'm supposed to do no matter what. And there's kind of no room for sadness, no room for anger or confusion. And yet you've since come to know God who can handle it all, and that we can come to him. I'm curious because I run into this all the time around here at Collide with women and actually have a book being released soon about this idea of our unresolved pain. And when we don't deal with it with God, it comes out sideways. And so there's a great invitation that we see in Jesus where he shows up in people's suffering. In fact, he goes out and chases down hurting people and enters the mess and enters the grief and enters the pain. But yet we've experienced in our families, in the church, in community, people who couldn't handle our pain. So they made us feel like we had to move on from it. Right? Like almost like your pain has an expiration date. Like you can grieve, I've heard of things like you had a miscarriage, you can grieve for 2 weeks, then you need to move on, or you should pray and be glad that you have Jesus, or like you said, count it all as joy. When you think back to being in that doctor's office and knowing this is not good and God saying, I'm with you. If you were to go all the way back there, and if you would have held on to the idea that you just have to count it all as joy and not grieve with God, what kind of parent do you think you would have been the last many years if you would have done that, if you would have ignored your own grief?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first thing that comes to mind is really angry, because I think anytime I find myself not allowing space for that grief, what comes out is anger. Those emotions have to go somewhere. I think I would have been really, really angry. I think I would have pushed my whole family way harder, way beyond what any of them could have actually been able to handle in the midst of all of that. Because I still daily face the challenge of lowering my ideals and expectations to where my family actually is, not just where I wish they were. And I think had I not actually been able to face any of it, I would have just kept pushing everybody harder, faster. Like, we still need to uphold the standard. We still need to do all the things. I would have operated as if I don't have a special needs daughter. And I would say these are still places I find myself and have to reel back from and have to recognize, okay, here I am. I'm doing it again. I'm operating as if this hasn't happened, and that it just doesn't work. And I think that is the mystery and the misunderstood, I think maybe especially in the church at times, although it is getting better. This idea that when something really hard happens, we go through this process and things get better and we return to life as normal, as it used to be before that thing happened. And there are times when that does happen, like the difference between acute pain and chronic pain. Like if you break an arm, you have to change your lifestyle for a little while. It's really painful, but you heal and recover. And as long as it wasn't a really severe break, you go back to life as it was before. But most major life catastrophic events don't actually work that way. We go back to life differently. I mean, especially in our case, ours is maybe more an extreme version. But I think of my friends who've lost family members. My dearest friend lost her brother 3 years ago. And her life will never be the same. You never just get over a loss like that or an extreme disappointment. But what I've found is the beauty of how God can meet you in what your life is now. When you can shed the ideals of what you thought it was going to be and actually see what he wants to do with it now, that's where God can do some of his absolute greatest work. And what I didn't understand about James 1 is the joy that's actually being talked about is what the suffering produces. It is not the suffering itself. No suffering is joyful. It is never like, who is ever laughing their way through suffering? Not anybody I know, unless they're just reframing it so they don't have to experience it. But what it produces, if we can stick with God in it, that is really joyful. Like what it has produced in my family, I wouldn't trade for the world. I would never wish it upon my worst enemy, and I don't want to live it again. But what it's produced in all of us, I wouldn't trade. And I think that is more what that scripture means than what I thought it meant.
When you think about women listening who haven't made space for their grief because they've been taught not to, and that pain is coming out sideways, like you gave the example, you think you'd be angry, you think would have kept pushing your family as though you didn't have a special needs daughter. For moms listening who haven't made space for their grief and it's coming out sideways, what's your best advice for them?
I mean, I think you have to slow down enough. And I say this with, you have to do this in manageable doses. If you just are like, okay, I'm going to carve out 24 hours alone and I'm going to face my grief, well, it will probably completely overwhelm you. But when I think we have to start by learning to be able to listen to our bodies, listen when we're tired, listen when we're feeling tightness in our chest or our stomach is a mess because we're feeling a lot and we're just not allowing ourselves to go there. And then just slow down enough to try to grab a quiet moment and just ask God, like, what is this about? What do you want me to know? What am I actually feeling right now? What is behind the anger that's coming out or the escaping because I don't actually want to feel anything or whatever it is for you that is for me, it often shows up in like frantically cleaning, keeping everything super clean, super organized. That's a way that I evade my feelings. But just
if you have any big feelings and you want to come over to my house, just call me.
There you go. All right. I talked to a therapist once and I was like, I know that I like clean and exercise to like deal with my feelings. And I want to stop doing that. And he just kind of chuckled and he goes, well, there are more unhealthy ways that you could do that. Like, okay. Makes me feel a little better. But like just knowing what are you doing to try to not feel them? And can you pause for a minute and just begin to peel back the layers? What am I actually feeling? You have to start there. And then someone once said, was explaining grief like waves in an ocean. Like when a wave, we can't predict when a wave of grief or all of those feelings are going to hit us. And it feels like if I lean into it, it's just going to be completely overwhelming and it's going to last forever and I'm going to get stuck there forever. But really, if we can just let that wave crash for a minute and just face it fully, well, the wave then breaks and goes back out to sea. And that was really helpful for me because I think I was afraid that I was just going to get stuck, that I was going to be this negative person, that I was never going to be happy again. Which wasn't actually true, but I had some fear around that. So I think just like pausing long enough to be able to name that feeling and ask God to join you in it, ask him what's behind it, what is it about, and then not to be afraid of taking a minute to let yourself fully feel that. I mean, I remember so many years of taking my daughter to therapy and taking all of our other kids with us, and it's just chaotic and hard. And I started to notice like, okay, every time I come home, not every time, but like most of the time, I just feel exhausted. Like I need to take a nap. And it was a 1-hour therapy session. And I just had the realization one day of like, oh, I am like deeply grieving that this is my life as a mom, that we don't go out and do fun outings. We go to therapy every day. And so starting to recognize that feeling of exhaustion was me needing to take a minute and be sad for a minute, that this was the experience my kids were having, that they were growing up with the outing of the day being therapy, not a park or, and that was really helpful. And then I was able to like get up and finish the rest of my day, you know? And again, so simple, but yet I think in a culture that is so focused on everything being up and to the right, we don't value slowing down like that and actually letting ourselves process and feel the things we deem as negative emotions, right? We're all about like anything that's self-help or self-focus or like grounding ourselves, right? But I think especially as Christians, oftentimes we deem certain feelings and emotions as these negative things that we're supposed to just get over, and forgetting that we serve a God who created us to feel all of those things and who also felt all of those things. When you read Jesus in the garden, what is he doing? He is grieving with his Father for what's about to happen, and he's asking him to take it away. And then he does it over and over and over again, and then ultimately surrenders. But he's not happy about what is about to happen. And I think if Jesus was willing to do that, I think it shows us how important it is for us to stop, to slow down, and let ourselves be able to do that.
It's really interesting because I think there's a tendency for moms to think they need to hide their pain from their kids.
Yeah.
And there's something really powerful, even about the image of you going to therapy with all your children, that to me, when I picture it, is an invitation that models for them how they can take their grief and their pain to Jesus for the rest of their lives. Like if all moms who experience pain and suffering act like we're fine when we're with our children, when we're really not fine and we break down and come undone in the closet only or in the shower. I hear a lot about the shower. I only cry in the shower. How are we modeling feelings are real, grief is real, I need Jesus, I need help and healing, because we're hiding all of that from our kids. Like, I understand not turning to our kids to be our therapists.
Totally.
But the image that you're inviting us to see in your own story, I think, is one that your kids in their future, when they experience suffering, will have some tools in their tool belt. You modeled it's normal to make space for grief. What have you seen has been the power of doing that, modeling that for your kids?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Okay. So first I want to say you are spot on with what you're saying. And if my mom were here, she would tell you she worked really hard to shield us. So she was born hearing normally. And then right after she had me in her early mid-20s, she started losing her hearing. And between mid-20s to 40, went completely deaf. She now has a cochlear implant, but is functionally deaf. And it was her, she wrote a book about it. He Speaks in the Silence, her deep wrestle with God. She almost completely rejected God. And she worked overtime to shield us kids. We were all pretty little at the time, to shield us from what that was emotionally like for her. So like I said, I grew up knowing suffering happens, and that none of us are immune to it. But grief was a steep learning curve. And if she were here now, she would say, what I wish I had done is let you guys into that with appropriate doses, you know, because it did leave us less equipped as we got older to know how to handle grief. And I would say with my kids, especially my older two, who are 16 and almost 14, their ability to sit in uncomfortable feelings and sadness and anger and grief astounds me. Like and I think because they were around it from a really young age, they suffered young. And there's multiple other things. My son went through a horrible 2-year illness that we kind of lost him for 2 years. And it's interesting to hear them. Every once in a while, they will talk about how sometimes they feel lonely in friendships because they have really a theology of suffering, a vocabulary of suffering, of difficult emotions. And they have a lot of friends who are wonderful, happy kids who kind of just need everything to be happy all the time. And they'll express every once in a while, especially my son, who's like just kind of a deep soul. She'll be like, yeah, like sometimes I just, because he struggles with depression, he's like, sometimes I just need to be around somebody who's okay with me not being okay. And so I think it's given them this ability to sit with other people in their pain and for people to feel really safe with them, because there's nothing that makes them feel uncomfortable about emotions or pain, theirs or somebody else's. And I honestly, by the grace of God, I just think it was that the grief was so big, it was like impossible to hide from them. And I was learning so much about grief and suffering, reading every book I could get my hands on, which was just giving us, and then at the same time going to all these therapies for my daughter where she's on the autism spectrum. Like we're getting a language for how to talk about emotions that I didn't grow up with. And so I think it was like all these layers that they've gotten that now I just feel like my son's thinking about becoming a therapist. I feel like my daughter should become a therapist. She already is to her friends, where they just have this language that we didn't have. And I'm seeing the gift of when you can give as much as you can and fumble your way through it, give your kids some of that vocabulary really by you doing it yourself and sharing with them, and by just sitting with them when they feel something and mirroring back to them, like, sounds like you're really upset that things didn't go the way you were planning. Like, do I have that right? And just sit with them and let them say whatever it is they need to say. I feel like it hasn't been entirely intentional. I mean, I think now it is more intentional, but it didn't start out that way. Whereas I feel like every member of our family has this now ability to do that with each other and with other people. And we are also about as normal as you get, and we get mad at each other and we don't always do it well. But I think because they had to suffer and see suffering young, it's also been a gift for them.
I love it so much. I think just even in my own experience, I can resonate. My kids are young adults now, but there were so many times where I felt like I was grieving my childhood pain, and it was coming out sideways in ways that I wanted to hide. I wanted to sweep under the rug. And I would have these messy mom moments or messy life moments. And I truly look back and I'm so glad that I was real about those with my kids, because I think it helped them to know deep within that God can handle it all. He can handle it all, and they know now where to go to when they feel messy and broken. And so, you know, you do feel a little like, oh, should I be hiding all of this? Should I look put together every single day? Should I not admit I'm sad or not cry in front of my kids? But it offers a richness that can't be replaced.
They're so smart and perceptive, too, that we might think we're hiding stuff, but they see right through it, especially as they get older. And I think the more we can just put on the table, appropriately so, not putting on their backs. But I see my husband do this with our kids constantly. Like I said, he did not grow up in a home like I did. And he has been on a long journey of healing from his childhood, basically, as he is parenting kids. And it's messy and it's humbling. But the more, especially that they've gotten older, that he's brought them into his story and just said, hey, none of this is an excuse for me overreacting, but here's why my nervous system reacts like a hair trigger. And here's all the things I'm doing to try to heal. And here's all that God is doing. So please be patient with me. But like, he's invited them into the bigger story that is generation after generation of trauma and nobody knowing Jesus. And like some of the hardest stories you could imagine is his whole family line. And so I think there's power in that too, especially if we want to raise kids who are compassionate towards other people. If we don't understand other people's stories and what they came from, we can't really be compassionate. And so, yeah, I think for anybody, especially who wasn't raised in any sort of solid home. But even if you were, you know, there are no perfect parents. There are things, I mean, I've named so many with my kids of like, yeah, we've got like generation after generation of this specific sin, and I'm trying really hard for it to stop with our family, and I'm not going to get it right. But if it stops a little with ours and then a little more with yours, a few generations, this could be gone. And so I think just bringing them into that is also really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think they'll better understand the power of Jesus, the power of his healing and redemption when they know the brokenness, when they know the story that he healed. But if we don't let them in on that, they don't actually see the power. So it's very cool. I know you and I could talk forever, but one of the things that I have to ask you before we close up this podcast is there could have been and maybe you do feel this way, but you discover your daughter's diagnosis, you're grieving, I'm sure you're overwhelmed. Like you said, you're not going back to your old life, you're going back to an entirely new life, new way of living, new medical challenges, all of these things. Why have you and your husband chosen to allow God to use that story to minister to others in the midst of going through it?
I will never forget, I think we were still in the hospital at the time of her diagnosis. And my husband just said something. I don't know if we were praying together or if he just said it. And he just said, God, use our pain. Like, don't waste any of our pain. And I think that profound thing that came out of his mouth in the haze of, you know, just so much unknown, and then just became a continuous prayer, like, God, don't waste our pain. And I think we are these storied creatures. I mean, we're always looking for meaning and for purpose. And I think God created us that way. And we know as believers that we have this someday hope, this like beautiful thing we get to look forward to where everything will be made right. But we also have a very active and alive and present God who is with us in all moments, letting us experience these mini redemptions over and over again this side of heaven. And I think there was something about that prayer that set us on a trajectory of perspective of like, well, I kind of, and really when you're faced with pain like that, you really have two options. It can make you really bitter, really angry. You can either reject God or just like be kind of mad at him, not fully reject him, but like just become hard-hearted. And that's understandable. We're human. Or you can say, okay, like this is what's before me and I want to learn and grow and let it shape me. I have to go through it either way. And I think there was just something in us that was like, okay, we want to see God use this in some way, having no idea what that was going to mean. And you can take that too far, again, to hyper spiritualize things and not feel your pain as it's happening. And it wasn't like a God, will you use it right now? It was like, just please don't let all of this pain go to waste someday. And so there is this kind of redemptive arc in talking about it. And especially for me, whenever I get to have one-on-one conversations with families who are going through some sort of medical trauma or learning to parent a neurodiverse kid, or I just feel like it just feels like this wink from God of like, here, your story is not without purpose. It's not wasted. I don't believe that God intended for our daughter's brain to go through what it did, but it did somehow go through his hand, and he does know about it, and he does have the power to, like I said, give us these mini redemptions this side of heaven and to use her story in our family and in other people's lives. And so it feels like being a steward of our story is openly sharing it where there are spaces to and where it's appropriate. Because I think there's the one universal thing we all experience is pain, like I said. And when we can hear somebody else talk about their pain honestly, and when we can hear them with that honesty talk about how God showed up in the midst of it, then we all feel hope. And so I think the more, just as a culture, as believers, we can start to just talk about our pain. I think we can give a lot of people permission to allow God to enter their pain, and experience him in a totally new way. And I heard years into our journey, we all know about like the stages of grief, right? Like the book that was written about it. And turns out that it was co-authored. It was two people who wrote it, but one of the co-authors, after he wrote the book, lost his son and started to discover, there are not just 5 stages of grief. There's a 6th one, and it's meaning. It's making meaning. And just to reiterate, like that's in all of us, this desire for meaning. And I think it's a God-given desire. And I think when we can hand that to him and say, okay, just use this however you want to use it. When it's time, when I have the maturity to be able to steward it, when I've embodied it enough that it's okay for me to share it. I think there is a time where we just have to be in the fire, learning whatever it is God is trying to teach us in it before we're always ready to share it. But yeah, I think there's something really redemptive about being able to share what we've gone through.
So beautiful. And Elizabeth, I love that you've been intentional in your parenting, but also in your pain, and you're allowing God to purpose it to help other people in theirs. So thank you for hopping on today. And I know there's going to be women who want to check you out and listen to your podcast and see this work that you're doing with both your husband and your parents. How can they do that?
Yeah. I think I am terrible about ever being on social media myself or posting on it. But intentional_parents is where you can find us on social media. And then intentionalparents.org is our website. There's lots of stuff there. You can see kind of upcoming events and things like that. You can connect with the podcast there as well.
I love it. Thank you for being on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Wow, friend, I hope that blessed you as much as it blessed me. I just love the prayer that Elizabeth's husband prayed. God, use our pain. We can't necessarily keep ourselves from experiencing pain here on earth, but we can be open to purposing it. And for some reason, purposing it brings some sense of healing in some ways. And I can't help but see Jesus as one who chose to purpose his pain as well. On the cross, his wounds, by his wounds we are healed, is what Isaiah says. And so, friend, I encourage you today to make space for your grief and all your feels. God can handle them all. And when you say yes to him meeting you there, when you say yes to working through your grief or going to therapy, or coming before God and praying such a prayer, you're also modeling to your children what they can do when they suffer and experience hardship. So I pray that the Lord would meet you in that space this week, and that you would experience his witness, his presence, his love, his compassion, and his help and healing. Keep colliding, friend, and we'll catch you next week.